Hey everyone, TechPriestFred here. Today I wanted to discuss the weakest orc in the game and perhaps the weakest character in the game for some people, boss Gulgortz. We know that he has a rework coming for him sooner or later, so if you want to check out my ideas on how to improve him, there's a link to my previous orc rework video in the corner of the screen right now. So, about the video format. In those deep dives, we'll be looking at a character and analyzing them step by step. What are their strong points? What are their weak points? What requirements do they meet for legendary release events? What synergies do they have? And how can you make them work better with what we currently have in the game? So, without wasting your time, what are his strong points? Well, first of all, he has pretty good performance in the early game, especially when clearing Octarius, which makes bringing him to Silver 1 not a horrible investment overall. Then, he has 5 hits on his basic attack and 3 more hits on his passive, which means that he scores 8 hits total with each attack. One thing that I wanted to mention is that his pierce ratio, damage output and hit number is very close to Reva's when she is shooting from ranged and without marker light or mechanical buff to her passive, so I guess it's something. Then, while his passive could be considered shooting, it seems to be coded to be either melee or ranged depending on who it shoots. So the passive can benefit from both ranged only and melee only if the right conditions are met. Also, Gorgutz can kill 2 units a turn if he can kill one of them with his basic 5 hits and another one with his passive. So that's extra useful against battle fatigue enemies. Then, his WAAAGH can be used as a movement tool for both Gulgortz and his allies, providing a 1-turn buff to melee damage, kind of like Ragnar, but without control over it. The skill isn't totally random though, so it can actually be planned and played around when you are skillful enough. Gulgortz with his WAAAGH is also the highest movement melee character in the game right now. If you first move 3 hexes with him and then use WAAAGH, he can move up to 7 hexes during his turn in order to catch the enemy in melee and attack him. This makes him the only melee character in the game that can punch the enemy in the face round 1 on basically every map in the game. And, well, that's it for his strong points. So now to the bad side of the character. First of all, Gorgutz's damage output is very low when compared to other characters. He does damage only on his WAAAGH turn right now. Then, his tankiness is also subpar, mostly because of his low armor ratio, and you have to hope for blocks with his block item in order to be able to survive. The next weakness is that the WAAAGH damage buff is only about 800 for a single round at max level, while other buffers in the game provide around 900 to 1200 damage boost for the whole fight. Another weakness is that his pierce ratios are locked at 20%, which means that against evenly leveled or higher level enemies, he won't do much damage at all, mostly because of his low damage stat. And using his Daka trait by attacking with a ranged attack from range 2 means that his passive will not trigger, since it requires a melee attack to work. So, with those quick strengths and weaknesses out of the way, what qualities does Gulgortz bring to legendary release events? Well, first of all, he is a mechanical unit, which is useful for many tracks. He can be paired up with Necrons, Revas or Adeptus Mechanicus, giving him plenty of survivability. Then, he is a big target, which has seen some uses in the previous legendary release events. Currently, we don't have many big target units in the game, so if the requirement makes a comeback, he could be considered to be upgraded, especially if the track would be against battle fatigue enemies like the Tyrannies or the Guardsmen. He also has a Final Vengeance trait, which has not been used in legendary release events as of yet, but we have seen more and more characters having this trait, which could hint at potential use of it in future legendary release events. His chain damage type isn't as common as we could think, so unless we get a few more chain characters, it isn't very likely that the damage type will be a requirement for a track in the near future. Also, While having 5 hits in melee, he does not meet the minimum 5 hits requirement, since his base ranged attack has 3 hits, which qualifies him only for minimum 3 hits. Too bad that the Daka trait actually hurts his usability in the legendary release events. And as a side note, he won't ever be usable against orcs in any events. So this hurts a little, since they would be also great for the battle fatigue targets for his attacks. Orcs have been common enemies for the first few legendary release events, but since then we got some more unit diversity for other factions, which resulted in more diversity in our opponents too. Keep in mind though, that the orcs can make a comeback in future events. This makes Gulgortz a little bit of a worse investment than characters without unit diversity as enemies, like Tau or Word Eaters or Admech, which currently have no way to be included in legendary release events as opponents and are therefore safe investments for those events. Unless, of course, a full alliance is banned like Imperial, Xenos or Chaos, but that is something that we cannot predict. So, he has Chain, 3 hits, Mechanical, Big Target, and potential Final Venges. That's not a premium roster of requirements to be met, especially since there are way better characters for almost every of them, so investing into Gulgortz seems like a bad deal overall. Well, kinda is, but we can make him work somehow, trust me. Let's try to make him work by fixing his weaknesses and enhancing his strong sides with proper synergies, shall we? Okay, synergy number 1. His low damage can be fixed by adding damage buffs of all sorts. Universal ones would be Calgar and Elgion, but for example, if you want more crits, Aitana would be your best friend, and if you are against Psykers, you could include Helbrecht. Also, for various PvP game modes like Guild Wars or Tournament Arena, you can use Tangida's active to buff Gulgortz and his damage output significantly against enemies with lowered armor, which can be achieved by various combinations using Snapper Rekka, God's Will, Tangida himself, Vitruvius and his active, or perhaps a DevGuard teammate. Okay, synergy number 2. While fixing tankiness for mechanical units is easy to do with using mechanics, some enemies will shred through Gulgortz without giving you a proper chance to heal him up. This can be fixed by bringing various enhancers to your team. For example, Giba Scraps can increase Gulgortz's armor when standing behind him and healing him every turn. But if you want just the armor buff, you should go for Tangida, since he increases the armor by 33% more. It's 800 when compared to 600 at level 50. If you want to be super cheesy, you could also consider bringing Asmodai, since he increases the block values, but I don't think that it's a good idea at all. Okay, synergy number 3. You could use Onshi to give Gulgortz a second WA, but many of its uses come from the +1 movement stat for the turn that you use it, which means that there won't be much use for it the second time, since you are already sitting next to the enemy. It could also be used again to buff a melee attack of 4 of your melee characters, since it wouldn't work on Aoshi, unless you waited for a turn after refreshing it, which could also be a spicy idea itself. Synergy number 4. 20% pierce ratio for sure sucks, but what do you think about 44% pierce ratio? That's basically like power damage, which is currently at 40% pierce, and in theory, it could be made even better by getting up to 68%, which is basically plasma damage type, at 65% pierce. Well, how do we achieve that? Well, we use the only pierce ratio buffer in the game, of course, and that is Helbrecht. By using Helbrecht's active with Gulgortz, we fix a lot of his problems with one simple ability use. Here, let me showcase it to you with a video proof. This interaction is something that I found out quite early in my Tacticus journey, and I wanted to showcase it publicly to allow other players to theory craft with it and use it in their teams. As you can see on the screen, we have Gulgortz, Helbrecht and Onshi on the board. The idea is, as mentioned before, to buff up Gulgortz with Helbrecht's active ability. Now, as you can see on the screen, Helbrecht's active works for this round and the next round, right? So this should mean that since we use it right now, the damage buff and the pierce ratio buff should only stay online for the next round. Well, the thing is, it's not like that. You see, Helbrecht's active buff seems to be coded more like a stack that can be refreshed. If we use Onshi on turn 2, you can see that the damage and pierce ratios stack. We get 48% more pierce and 2 times the damage boost, as predicted. But the real magic comes into play on round 3. As you remember, Helbrecht's active works for 2 turns. The turn it is used and the next one. This should mean that on round 3, 2 turns after we use it for the first time, our pierce ratio bonus and the damage buff should be cut in half. But it does not happen. We have 48% pierce ratio buff and the full damage buff for the third round, meaning that combining Helbrecht and Onshi together, we can increase Helbrecht's value by not 100% like every other character, but 150% actually. This works amazingly for Gulgortz, since in theory we could give him 500 damage and 24 pierce ratio for 1 round, and 1000 damage boost and 48% pierce ratio for 2 rounds, which means that for 3 out of 6, but realistically 3 out of 5, since we only deal proper damage for 5 rounds most of the time, we can buff his performance. 60% uptime for such a buff is quite nice, essentially since Onshi has great synergy with Helbrecht's active too, and all of those 3 characters can benefit from WAAAGH due to their high hit counts. 8 for Gulgortz, 6 for Helbrecht, and 5 for Onshi. Keep in mind that the bonus damage from WAAAGH is also affected by the bonus pierce ratios from Helbrecht, so you can have an explosive 1800 damage buff with 48% pierce ratio that can buff up to 5 characters if you play it out correctly. Overall, if you want Gulgortz to deal great damage, Helbrecht is your best friend, especially if you are fighting Psykers, since Gulgortz in melee can use Helbrecht's passive buff against Psykers 8 times a turn, which is 12,000 damage per turn. Add in Actus with his attack resets and you have 24,000 damage of a buff per turn, which is amazing even for high legendary Psyker boss fights, which I showcased in my Forging Victory in Tacticus episode, linked in the corner of this video right now. As you can see, Gulgortz is not totally a lost cause. While he could use some upgrades, either to his tankiness or damage output, he's kinda versatile with his kit and playstyle. Like a jack of all trades, that's actually pretty bad in all of those trades. But right now, you can definitely make him work with the high diamond guild raid team, although it requires lots of setup and work that the other teams don't really need. If you're a madman that got your Gulgortz upgraded to diamond like me, I hope that this guide helped you. If you are not as deranged as we Gulgortz users, I hope that this video has shown you our perspective. If you're hyped for the upcoming reworks for Gulgortz, Snapper Wreck or Giba Scrubs, leave a WAAAGH in the comments. And please consider checking out my rework video. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video format. I'd love to have some more deep dives in the future. With so many characters in the game, this could be a regular series on the channel. Well, if you like the idea, please comment what characters you would like to see next. Anyway, that's all for today's video. I hope that we all learned something and that you will be looking for all the future character releases with more open mind. After all, if the characters suck, we can fix them by finding proper synergies, right? Well, have a good day and please remember, the machine is eternal.